Back in 2021, I moved to a small town in Montana after landing a job at a regional newspaper. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's name, and after 7 p.m., the streets went quiet. I didn't mind. After years of chaos in the city, I actually liked the silence. I found a small rental cabin just outside of town, just a one-bedroom unit behind an old farmhouse. The landlord was an old man named Mr. Hale. He lived in the main house, a couple hundred meters away from the cabin. He was in his 70s, soft-spoken, and barely left the property. The cabin had its own entrance, and it felt separate enough for me to have privacy. The rent was cheap, the view was beautiful, and I figured I'd stay until I saved up for something better. First few weeks, everything was fine. My job was demanding, and I worked late, sometimes getting home after dark. I never saw much of Mr. Hale, but his porch light was always on, and I'd see his silhouette through the front window sometimes. One evening, I came home after a 10-hour shift. I parked beside the cabin, unlocked the door, and went straight to the shower. I was halfway through washing my hair when I thought I heard a knock. I figured it was nothing because of the shower noise. Probably just the wind rattling the wood paneling. I slowed the shower to have some more shampoo, and then I heard it again. 3 distinct knocks, slow and steady. I shut off the water and stood there, listening. Nothing else came. Wrapped in a towel, I peeked out the front window. No one was there. But as I turned to step back, I noticed something odd. The porch light at the main house was off. That was the first time I'd ever seen it dark. The next day, I asked Mr. Hale about it. He looked confused and told me the bulb must have burned out. Then he mentioned something strange. He said, "I thought you had company last night. Saw a man walking toward your place just before sunset." I told him I didn't. He just shrugged and said maybe he was mistaken. That night, I stayed up late writing. Around midnight, I stepped outside for some air. I was barely a few steps from my door when I heard footsteps in the gravel behind the cabin. I turned around, no one was there. I walked to the side of the cabin, flashlight in hand. The air was dead still, but when I pointed the beam toward the woods behind the property, I saw a man leaning against a tree, his back turned toward me, and it looked like he was holding something, maybe a weapon. He didn't move, just stood there, half hidden in the dark. I backed away slowly, keeping the light on him, and got inside. I locked the door and pulled the curtain shut. My heart was hammering in my chest. I called Mr. Hale and told him someone was on the property. He came out with his shotgun and searched the area, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I asked him if the cabin had any kind of security system. He just laughed and said, "Nobody around here needs that. We've never had a break-in in 20 years. 2 nights later, it got worse. I came home late again around 9 p.m. As I walked up to my door, I noticed it was slightly open, just barely ajar. I was shocked. I knew I had locked it that morning. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and called Mr. Hale. He told me to wait outside while he came over. When he arrived, we both went in together. There was no one inside, but the lights had been switched off, and a chair in the corner of the living room was turned to face the window, as if someone had been sitting there, watching the door. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. Just that chair and this overwhelming feeling that I was being targeted. That was the final straw. The next morning, I packed my things and left town. I didn't even wait for my next paycheck. A week later, Mr. Hale called me. He said the local sheriff had found evidence that someone had been squatting inside the abandoned barn down the hill, an old drifter, possibly unstable. He'd been sleeping there for weeks. Among the things left behind were a few Polaroids. 2 mud-stained photos of my cabin at night. One of them was taken through the front window, the same window the chair was facing. I don't know what that man wanted, or what would have happened if I had come home earlier that night, but I'm glad I never found out. I live about 30 minutes outside a small town in South Dakota. It is a very serene place, but also the kind of place where you have to drive 10 miles just to get gas. I work remotely, so a quiet life was what I always wanted. I always wanted to be alone, to have maximum focus on my work and be more productive. So no roommates, no neighbors close by, Just a stretch of empty road, a few trees, and silence. It was a Friday night, nothing special. I'd wrapped up a rough week and was ready to just relax. I took a hot shower, made some ramen, and planted myself on the couch with my laptop and a few beers. The weather outside had dropped below freezing, so staying in felt like the best choice. Around 9 p.m., I realized I hadn't eaten anything real all day, so I figured I'd order takeout. The only place that delivered this far out was a local diner that offered late-night delivery. I placed an order for a cheeseburger and fries through their website, got the confirmation, and went back to watching videos. Time passed, maybe 45 minutes. I checked my phone, no update. I opened the tracking page, and it just said the order was processing. I didn't think much of it. Small-town diners are usually understaffed, especially on weekends. I was just killing time anyway and planning to stay up late. I must have dozed off without realizing it. When I woke up, my phone had slipped between the couch cushions and the room had gone dark. The TV was still on, playing some random autoplay video. Then I heard 3 knocks at the door. Slow, solid. I got up, still foggy from the nap and a little buzzed. Finally, food's here. I walked over and opened the door without checking. Something I never do, but my brain wasn't fully switched on yet. There was a man standing on my porch, late 30s, average build, heavy winter jacket, gloves. "How much do I owe you?" I said tiredly, but he didn't say anything, and then I asked him again. No answer. I got confused, so when I focused, I saw he had no delivery bag, no receipt, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, breathing heavily. Before I could ask what he actually wanted, he said, "You ordered food, right?" I nodded, expecting him to pull the bag out or hand me something, but he didn't move. He just stood there, then smiled slightly and said, "Just wanted to make sure the address was right. It'll be here soon." It was off. Something about how he said it felt rehearsed. And why would the delivery guy come before the food? I squinted at him and asked, "You're with the diner?" He nodded but didn't say anything else. No name, no uniform, nothing in his hands. There was a long silence. I told him I'd wait inside and close the door, locking it this time. Something about the way he stared made my skin crawl. I opened the diner's website again and checked the status of my order. Still marked as processing. I clicked the contact number. It rang a few times, then a tired-sounding guy picked up. I asked about my order, and he told me they never received it. Their system had gone offline around 9:30 due to a power issue. There was no delivery coming. I hung up and froze. The man who'd just been at my door, he wasn't from the diner. My heart was racing now. I peeked through the side window, but the porch was empty. I couldn't see anything on the driveway either. Just snow, trees, and darkness. I turned all the lights off and sat in the hallway, listening. I couldn't hear footsteps or a car engine, just the hum of the fridge and my own breathing. 10 minutes passed. Then I heard a soft creak, the back door. I never use the back door. It leads to a fenced area behind the house, and I always keep it locked. I crept through the kitchen and stood near the hallway, holding my breath. Then I heard another creak, like someone leaning their weight against the door. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and called 911. While I was on the line with dispatch, I heard a tap on the window next to the dining table. Just one quick knock. Then silence again. The deputy got there in under 10 minutes. He found footprints around the house, pressed deep in the snow, from the front porch to the back, and then disappearing toward the woods. There were no tire tracks. Whoever it was had come on foot, in below freezing weather, just to knock on my door and pretend to be someone else. The worst part? The footprints stopped about 20 feet into the trees. After that, I installed cameras and floodlights around the house. I haven't had anything strange happen since, but I still double-check every door before I sleep. I don't know if that guy was waiting for me to fall asleep with the door unlocked. I think he was looking for empty homes or vulnerable people to target, maybe for a break-in or something worse. When I opened the door, he probably realized I was out of it, tired, a little drunk, and saw an opportunity to take advantage of that. This happened in my final year living with my older brother. I was 20 back then when we shared a 2-story house not far from where we both worked. It was quiet, suburban, and our schedules rarely overlapped. He worked nights as a warehouse supervisor, and I did morning shifts at a mechanic shop. Most nights, I had the house to myself. It was Thursday evening. I got home from work around 5, grabbed a quick shower, and heated up leftovers. My brother had already left for his overnight shift. I remember the house feeling especially still that evening. Not in a creepy way, just silent. The kind of silence you don't notice until you suddenly feel alone with your own breath. I set up in the living room with the usual routine. Laptop on the coffee table, TV humming in the background, a can of soda sweating beside me. Around 9:30, I paused the video and decided to grab a snack. I walked into the kitchen and nearly jumped at the sight of the back door. It was wide open. We never left it open. That's just something we didn't do, especially since that door led directly to the backyard with no gate or fence. I stood there for a second, just staring at the empty doorway. The porch light was off, and the darkness beyond the threshold felt like it was pressing inward. I stepped forward and shut it, checking the deadbolt and knob twice. Then I walked through the downstairs rooms, kitchen, bathroom, den, checking windows and locks. Everything else seemed untouched. Maybe my brother left it open in a rush, but even thinking that felt like an excuse I was forcing on myself. I sat back down and tried to forget about it. But you know how it is. Once your brain decides something's off, every creak becomes suspicious. Every shadow stretches just a little too long. I kept glancing at the hallway behind the TV, half expecting someone to walk through it. Around midnight, I finally got tired enough to ignore the nerves and shut everything down. I turned off the lights, went upstairs, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but it wasn't deep sleep. I woke up what felt like an hour later, still in that dazed half state where you're not sure what pulled you from sleep. Then I heard a door closing, somewhere downstairs. Not a slam or rushed, just the quiet sound of a door clicking shut. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The house was dead silent again. I waited. Nothing followed it. No footsteps, no voices, just that thick silence wrapping around the house again. Grabbing my phone, I checked the time. It was 2:41 a.m. I slid out of bed and opened my bedroom door, which gave a soft creak like it always did. The hallway was dark. My eyes were still adjusting, but I kept the lights off. I didn't want to draw attention if someone was actually in the house. My room was directly above the living room, and I could see the top of the staircase from my door. Everything looked still. But I noticed something strange, like someone had turned off the circulation in the house. There was no hum of appliances, no distant buzz from the fridge, nothing. I went back inside, quietly grabbed a steel wiper handle from the washroom, and started creeping downstairs, one step at a time. The bottom floor was pitch black, except for the faint orange glow coming through the blinds from the street lamp outside. I stood at the foot of the stairs, trying to hear anything. There was nothing out of place. Cushions where they should be, chairs pushed in, front door closed. I turned to the hallway that led to the laundry room and basement door. That's when I noticed the basement door was shut. We never shut that door. It was a quirk of ours, too many horror movies growing up. We always left it cracked open so we could tell at a glance that no one was down there. But now it was completely shut. I stared at that door longer than I probably should have. My grip tightened around steel handle, and I walked up to it slowly, heart hammering hard enough to hear it in my ears. I reached for the knob and froze. I was too frightened to open it. Very difficult for a guy my age to resist that fear. I pressed my ear to the door. It had the stillness of a room after someone stopped speaking. Silence, no movement, no sounds. I didn't open it. It was very difficult for me. Instead, I backed away and returned upstairs, not taking my eyes off the hallway until I was back in my room. I locked my door and stayed awake until the sun started peeking through the blinds. By the time my brother got home that morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes bloodshot, phone in hand. I didn't even tell him what happened at first. Just asked if he shut the basement door before leaving the night before. He swore up and down he didn't even go near it. That entire day I felt off, like my thoughts weren't connecting properly. I kept remembering that heavy silence, how wrong it felt because we haven't had any situation like this in years, and the fact that this place was so peaceful. I was too tired, too wired, too determined to act normal and not let the fear win. I came home around 8:30 p.m. But the moment I stepped back inside the house, something felt wrong again. I didn't know why. Maybe the fear from the last night was still all over me. Every corner of the house was dark and terrifying, making me feel like a child. I locked the door behind me, checked every window, checked the back door twice. Then I went upstairs. I reached my room, flipped the switch. Nothing. No light. I stepped back into the hallway and hit the switch there. Same result. My heart started hammering in my chest. That's when I noticed a low, dull, like shoes scraping the floor from downstairs. I leaned over the railing, holding my breath. Two shadows broke from the dark below, fast, rushing for the stairs. Both men, both armed. I didn't wait. I slammed my door shut and locked it, barely having time to brace the dresser against it before they hit the first step. No time to call for help. No time to think. I grabbed my phone, ducked behind the bed, and texted my brother 3 words. They're inside, armed. I waited, heart hammering. They grabbed the doorknob and started twisting it hard, trying to force it open. I stood on the other side, leaning all my weight against the door, barely breathing, every muscle locked in place. We had this going on maybe for about 4 minutes. Whispers, then retreating. By the time the cops showed up, there was nothing left behind but the open basement door, swinging slowly on its hinges. This was my worst nightmare ever. I still don't know what they were after. Maybe they wanted more than quick cash. Maybe they meant to hold me until I gave them everything they came looking for. No incident after that. We moved out 3 weeks later. About a year and a half ago, I was living in a quiet, older house, the kind with creaky floorboards and a slightly musty smell. I'd bought it cheap because it needed some work, but it was just me and my dog, Max, so it was plenty big. I worked from home, doing freelance writing, so my days were pretty solitary. The house next door had been empty for as long as I'd lived there, easily 8 months. It was overgrown with weeds, and the windows always looked dark, like nobody had touched it in years. This particular evening it was storming outside. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled, making the old house groan. I was in my living room trying to concentrate on an article, but the power kept flickering, and Max was restless, pacing by the front door and letting out low growls. It was probably around 8:30 p.m. I figured the storm was making him anxious. Suddenly, a loud bang came from the wall that joined my living room to the empty house next door. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. Max let out a sharp bark. I froze, my heart thumping. Just the storm, I mumbled, trying to reassure myself, but it was too distinct. A few minutes later, another soft thump, but definitely from next door. I told myself it was just debris from the storm, maybe a tree branch hitting the side of the house. I tried to ignore it and get back to work. Over the next hour, I kept hearing things. Not loud bangs, but subtle noises. A faint scratching, like something dragging across wood. A soft creak, as if a floorboard was groaning under weight. They were spaced out, irregular, making my skin crawl. It felt like the house next door was alive. Then, around 10 p.m., I heard a distinct clunk and then the sound of something being slid open, like a window. This was much clearer, right through the wall. I couldn't take it anymore. Max was now whimpering and pressing himself against my legs. I decided to check things out, just to calm my nerves. I walked to the front window, peering out into the rain-swept night. No cars, no lights on in the vacant house. Nothing. It seemed completely dark and undisturbed. I went to my back door, made sure it was locked, and then headed back to the living room, trying to convince myself it was just the storm. I settled back on the couch, pulling a blanket over myself, hoping to forget about the weird noises. Max jumped onto the couch and lay across my lap, still a bit tense. I was just starting to drift off when a new sound started. It wasn't from next door, it was coming from inside my house. A low, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like someone lightly tapping a fingernail on a surface, but it echoed strangely from the hallway. I sat bolt upright, every muscle tense. Max lifted his head, a low rumble starting in his chest. The tapping continued, slow and steady. I slowly got off the couch, pushing Max behind me. I crept towards the hallway, the sound getting louder, seeming to come from the kitchen. I rounded the corner, my breath hitched in my throat. In the faint glow from the streetlights through the kitchen window, I saw a shadow outside the kitchen window of someone sitting there. When leaned my head from the side of the kitchen door, I saw a man. He was sitting at my kitchen table, facing away from me, his back to the wall. His head was tilted slightly to the side, and he was rhythmically tapping his fingers on the tabletop. He wasn't doing anything else, just sitting there, completely still, tapping. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by his tapping and the pounding of my own heart. He had to have known I was there. Max was growling, a deep guttural sound, but the man didn't move, didn't turn. He just kept tapping. His stillness combined with the chilling sound was terrifying. My mind screamed questions. Who was he? How did he get in? What did he want? I didn't see a weapon, but the sheer unexpectedness of him being there in my home was paralyzing. My mind raced. I needed to get out. I took a shaky breath, turned, and bolted for the front door, Max right on my heels. I yanked the door open, not caring about the noise, and ran out into the pouring rain, screaming for help. I looked back for a split second, and through the open front door, I saw him. He was still sitting at the kitchen table, perfectly still, his head slightly tilted. I kept running until I reached my nearest neighbor's house, banging on their door. They called the police, and within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. When police got there, they could hear from outside that same eerie fingers tapping inside. They approached carefully, going down to the kitchen and finding the man in the exact same position. They said he turned his head slightly to look at them, giving a short, crooked smile, then dropping his knife and letting them arrest him. He basically spoke nothing of what he was doing or had planned to do, or why he was there. Some of the officers I talked to thought he might have been trying to get arrested for some reason, but strangely there's no information on the guy. No matching fingerprints or identification of any kind. And without him being cooperative, they had no way to find out who he really was or if he had any kind of mental illness that could be behind all of it. That night, as the police led him away in handcuffs, he suddenly stopped, turned his head, looked directly at me, standing by the police car, and his eyes cold and unblinking. Then he said a single word, chilling promise that I felt deep in my bones. Soon. He was then pushed into the police car, and I never saw him again. But every once in a while, I still hear that same eerie fingers tapping in the middle of my dreams, making me wake up in a panic, thinking he could be back, and that chilling word echoing in the quiet of my room. I moved out of that house a month later, unable to ignore the feeling of those tapping fingers. To this day, sometimes when it rains heavily or when a house is too quiet, I hear a faint, rhythmic tapping in my head. This happened when I was 15, living with both my parents in a small one-story house just outside the city. The neighborhood we were in had lots of tall trees and only a few homes scattered around. It wasn't really suburban, but it wasn't fully rural either. My parents commuted into the city each morning for work and wouldn't get home until early evening. It was a regular weekday, cloudy all day with off and on rain. Everyone had been talking about a bad storm that was supposed to hit by nightfall. I didn't think much of it. I just hoped it wouldn't start pouring while I walked home from school. Luckily, the rain held off long enough for me to get inside before the wind and downpour really picked up. These kinds of storms were usually overhyped, but this time felt different. The sky got darker than usual, and the rain came down in thick sheets. Wind battered the sides of the house, and every few minutes a sharp gust would rattle the windows or make the whole place creak like it was being pushed. Still, I was alone and figured it was fine. I had some leftovers in the fridge and planned to just ride the storm out with the TV on in the living room. The house wasn't very big, just a couple bedrooms, a bathroom, and the main area. I remember sitting on the couch with the volume low so I could hear the rain. Around 5:40, my phone lit up with a flood warning alert. A few minutes later, my mom called. She said several routes home were already blocked, and it wasn't safe to try driving through. She and my dad were going to wait it out at a hotel in the city for the night. I told her everything was fine and the house wasn't leaking or anything. She seemed relieved and told me to stay put. Not long after we hung up, I went into the kitchen to heat up some food. While I was waiting, I heard this dull knocking sound. It was hard to tell where it came from because of the wind and rain, so I brushed it off thinking it was maybe a branch hitting the siding. But just as I sat back down with my plate, I heard it again, 3 sharp knocks. This time, it was definitely near the front door. I froze, not sure what to do. The storm outside was too intense for anyone to be out there, let alone knocking. After sitting there frozen for maybe half a minute, I walked slowly toward the door and looked through the peephole. It was completely fogged from the cold and moisture, so I could barely make out anything but blurry gray shapes moving in the rain. There wasn't anyone there, at least not visibly. I opened the door slightly, just enough to peek out. The wind immediately shoved it a little, and I had to push back. The porch was empty. But then I noticed the ground. There were a line of muddy footprints coming up from the front yard, leading right to the doorstep. The rain hadn't washed them away yet, which meant they had to be fresh, very recent. I slammed the door shut and locked the deadbolt. My stomach was in knots. I thought about calling the cops, or my parents at the very least, but I hesitated. Whoever it was clearly wasn't out there now, and maybe they were just looking for help. That's what I told myself anyway. I stayed alert, kept the lights on, and didn't turn the volume on the TV back up. Eventually, without meaning to, I laid down on the couch and dozed off. When I woke up, everything felt off. The living room was dark, and the only sounds were the storm and the faint creaking of the house. I grabbed my phone, saw it was a little after midnight. I also saw a string of missed calls and texts from both my parents. They were still stuck in the city and weren't coming back until morning. I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and then I heard distinct, slow footstep. It came from directly above me. Our house didn't have a second floor, but there was a narrow crawlspace attic you could reach through the hallway ceiling. The sound wasn't wind or some tree hitting the roof. It was a solid step, like a shoe pressing down on wood. I stayed frozen for a few seconds, then another step, and another. Something was up there. I turned my phone's screen brightness all the way down, grabbed it, and crept to the hallway bathroom. It was the only room with a lock. I went inside, locked the door, and crouched in the corner, trying not to make a sound. I dialed 911, whispered everything I could to the dispatcher, my name, address, that I was alone and there was someone in the attic. I didn't even wait for her response. I just kept the call going and stayed quiet. After a minute or two, I heard movement again. This time, not from above. Whoever it was had come down. I could hear footsteps coming from the hallway just outside. Slow, steady, not even trying to be quiet. They passed by the bathroom, paused for a second. I held my breath. Then they kept going. I heard a faint sound like something being dragged across the floor. Then nothing. A few minutes later, headlights flashed through the windows, followed by a loud knock at the front door. It was the police. When they came inside, they found the back door cracked open. The officers swept the house but didn't find anyone. They told me the attic hatch had been pushed open and there were faint shoe prints on the floorboards up there. But the person must have climbed down and escaped before they arrived. They said it was likely the storm covered the sound of them entering, possibly through the back, and the attic was probably how they avoided being seen. To this day, we don't know who it was or what they wanted. They didn't take anything. They didn't try to confront me. But what haunts me most is how they only moved through the areas of the house where I would have been. The hallway, the attic, my bedroom. It felt like they weren't there to rob the place. Maybe they were looking for someone my age. Even years later, every time a big storm rolls in, I find myself checking the attic hatch and the back door twice before I even try to sleep.